want to find out, you can't tell your heart what to do. Me plus you.
You made a database for your school district.
Yeah, to keep track of attendance and grades.
And they used it
Yeah, they didn't have anything before that.
at the age of
I was 8 years old. Yeah.
8 years old.
Yeah. And then I made my first video game in late 70s using a computer that's way weaker than this.
So when you do all this, and especially the Genome project, which could have made you a top-notch, probable billionaire, why give it up? Because this, you'd be in the league.
Well, we felt at the time that the opportunity was much bigger than the genome itself. And the opportunity to automate drug discovery, to go from being confronted with a problem and having a new drug, or at least a diagnostic test, and get that done very quickly. Our dream was what we called Star Trek medicine. I don't know if you've ever seen the TV show Star Trek,
Yeah,
or
I
the
did.
movie. And they would have a tricorder, a device that could immediately diagnose a disease, and they would discover new drugs by the end of the TV episode. So that was my dream. Could we discover a drug in an hour from being faced with a terrible
Just
disease?
in case something happens,
Yeah, like Ebola.
Ebola-like.
Exactly. You're faced with this problem. How quickly could you come up with a cure? So that was always our dream. So if the genome was just one piece of the puzzle, and if we could get to the point where we could automate it all, which we did years later with the company that used artificial intelligence, we got it down to 4 months, a process that used to take 20 years. So we did collapse the time. It's not down to an hour yet, but that was our dream. So we figured, giving away the genome was the right thing to do ethically. I'd felt that the cost of getting DNA had dropped so much from when I first started as a genetic engineer in 1986. Back then, the theoretical cost of one human genome was $100 trillion. That was the theoretical cost. It was impossible to do.
It was
It
impossible.
would have taken 1,000 years and cost $100 trillion. By 1991, the cost had fallen 100-fold. And it was down to, I guess, about 100, went from 100 billion down, 100 trillion down to 1 trillion. And then another 5 years later, it went down another 100-fold. So by 1996, it was down to 10 billion. And we thought, okay, we're getting close. And by the year 2000, it was about $1 billion in the year 2000. It was about $1 billion in the year 2000. And I guess as of this year or last year, it's $1,000 to do a human genome. And we're now expecting it to be down to about $100 by 2016. So much of the value that I had was in our stock. And our company that we had started back in '91, we tripled our revenues every year for 7 years. We then, over the next few years, raised about $100 million of investment, eventually being valued at $1 billion. And so that was something we had started in our apartment. And we paid ourselves...
Silicon Valley?
Yeah, yeah. And me and my best friend. And we just grew the company organically until we got our investors. And then we got, we were very large. We were considered the #1 privately owned biotech company in the world. And when the market crashed, it crashed on the day of our IPO. This is March, the end of March. And
How unfortunate.
Very poor timing.
You're one of the very few people who, I'm told, precisely predicted the global credit crunch. One wonders, what kind of algorithms did you use to get the more or less compute exactness of what was going to happen?
Well, a lot of how I look at the future is by looking at our past. And I think we can learn a lot from our past, just as I did with discovering new drugs by looking at past efforts. I do the same thing with predicting things economically or politically, or in many other ways. So there seems to be a pattern that every 70 or 80 years, societies seem to rhyme, that their behavior that went on 70 or 80 years earlier.
Every 70 years, what you're saying is that humanity faces some kind of an existential threat.
Yeah, I would say each society does. And
Each society.
Yeah, because they're not exactly in sync.
But when you used these patterns to analyze what would happen, in a way, you were never taken serious. But did you also see it in your analysis that you will say the rating is on the wall, but nobody is going to take you serious?
Well, I had already seen that in 2000, because I warned my board of directors that there was going to be a colossal crash of the dot-com bubble. I warned them 6
The
months
dot-com bubble.
Yeah, 6 months earlier, I showed why it would happen by the day it happened. By it would happen in March or April, and I watched, to my huge disadvantage, that people had incredible trouble shifting gears. People just could not believe that things would go so harshly in reverse. And obviously it happened again. In 2007, I told many people, both here and in America and Canada, that the US financial system was going to collapse. Europe would begin to unravel and reveal that it was a fraud.
I made my first database in 1972. It was in a mainframe on punch cards in COBOL.
The year I was born. It was revolutionary. We were the first company to annotate the human genome ahead of cellular genomics, ahead of the Human Genome Project.
Well, I was only 8 years old. And that was that tracked attendance for my school district. So even by the time I graduated, I guess, what would you call it, S6 in India? I was 18 years old or 17, and they were still using the same system I had made since I was 8. And so I was able to change my data to make my attendance look better. And because I was teaching class.
Wait, you graduated? You graduated at 18? That's quite an achievement.
17. Well, actually, I started Harvard at 15.
Wow. Normally it takes 22.
I had gotten a super high score on the PSAT. And so all the universities of the world were begging me to start as their whatever, precocious genius. So I went to Harvard for a term for chemistry. And as part of the deal, my dad also made me go to the U.S. Naval Academy's Genius Engineer program. So I commuted between Cambridge and Annapolis. So I get both the liberal art environment and the strict military conservative exposure as a balance. But they eventually panicked and said I needed to be back among people my own age. And so high school was a joke. So I just had, I took advanced placement courses for uni, and I did lots of extracurriculars. I was on the speech and debate team, drama club, jazz band, wrestling team. I was a sprinter. I ran the 1500 meter number 4 in my county. They don't get in trouble for that, but anyways, so then I went on to Stanford and did a double major of biochemistry and international relations. And even did a term over in Japan for comparative East Asian industrial economics and modern Chinese Maoist history. They say if you're young and you don't do that, you don't have a heart. If you're old and you're still doing that, you don't have a brain. So anyways, I'm somewhere in between still. Too much heart, too little brain, I don't know. But it depends on who's judging. So anyway, so I get out of school, I work at the Carnegie Institution of Plant Biology at Stanford, and I get asked to be a genetic engineer, and they train me up. And I thought they were rather arrogant and elitist about it, and the work we were doing was, in my opinion, just following recipes, but, at microliter levels. And so I even taught the janitor and the dishwasher how to do genetic engineering. And then I designed my first PCR robot back in 87. And then I got into the whole robotics of DNA synthesis and DNA sequencing. And I had my first business at Stanford in the medical center as the first large-scale DNA lab in the world.
Okay.
Under Nobel Prize winner Paul Berg. He won the Nobel Prize for cutting and pasting DNA. So I ended up giving him what I call the urinal pitch. We were in the restroom together, and I had an idea.
That's very cute.
That we could set up this lab that would make customized DNA and sequence DNA for the whole campus, because people were sending that out either to commercial labs or struggling very hard to try to do it on their own. So he said, yeah, write it up. And I said, yeah, I think it's going to take about $2 million, but it should break even in about 6 months. He said, yeah, let's do it. So, yeah, some people have heard of elevator pitches. This was the urinal pitch. Anyways, and yeah, he was, obviously he's my hero for being, I had a lot of Nobel Prize winners as my mentors at Stanford. So I was very privileged that way. They all treated me like they were my uncles. My old Jewish uncles. There's a lot of Jewish Nobel Prize winners. Yeah.
Okay.
So, Arthur and Roger Kornberg and Irv Weiss. And it's just even, no one's going to know these names, so I won't bother. Anyway, so I got to have my lab, and I did make it profitable in the first 6 months, and we just kept on automating and speeding up DNA synthesis and making it cheaper and cheaper, using less chemicals, and then the information management problem became an issue. So I had to build databases to keep track of all this stuff. And luckily, I learned as a child how to write databases, and so I learned at this point, this is whatever, almost 20 years later, I'm, doing it on, I think at that time on the Mac with Fourth Dimension, and then moved over to Sybase and Oracle. Just teaching myself, there were no classes for any of this. So I started just building up my database infrastructure to track all my records of clients and what I was making for them and what I was sequencing. And so I started building DNA databases and, I'd look for similarities and differences of the molecules people were making, and I was helping to partner different research labs. And I was, hey, why are you asking me to make this molecule for you when that other lab down the hallway I already made for them? Why don't you guys share? I made enough for them to last for 1,000 experiments. So you guys just, so I would do a lot of partnering because I knew of what everybody was working on, who was working on HIV, who was working on lung cancer, who was working on whatever. So I could, just because I had a database that was ostensibly based on just being a short order cook, cooking up DNA for people. And that's how I used to think of myself. All right, here's your quick little customized oligonucleotide. And then they came in and I started, we did DNA sequencing. And in all cases, I got to make advances in the laboratory process, in automating and extending how long the molecules could be made or read, how accurate, etc. So I got a few papers on that. So those are methodology papers. I would say in those days, I probably chopped off 2 of the zeros of the cost of the human genome ultimately. So I remember when they first announced we were going to do the human genome, I heard about it in 85, 86. I was just finishing Stanford, just starting at Carnegie. And I was the lab manager at Carnegie, and I calculated, oh my God, this is going to cost $100 trillion. And it's going to take like 10,000 people years to get this done. How the hell? It was never going to happen. We're just kidding ourselves. So anyways, as time went on, I would recheck my calculations, and partly of my own actions and those of others, we chopped off like 2 zeros every 5 years for a few repetitions. And then I had Pangea ready, right? Because I knew that the data was going to be coming out of the public domain. And if we were ready to catch it and put it together, we'd have a shot. And obviously it was very competitive. And long before that, we were doing many other projects to survive. I mean, I wanted to be in biotech, but biotech wasn't always profitable. So we had to do everything.
A quick question, right? Let's detour a little bit. You said something I think is interesting. Sensors, right? So because we are doing video here and I sort of do software engineering as a job, I know images, right? So I know like how Adobe can tell a video, how even more complex software can say, look at faces. So I know how, like I can...
Defining outlines, paradigms.
So I know most of that, right? But now I'm wondering, so sound wouldn't be very hard as well. I mean, I imagine, I don't know, I haven't worked a lot about sound, but I'm sure that's something I will figure out. But when it comes to test, right, you're saying you're building sensors to define flavor, right?
Actually, I'm not so much building the sensors, but I'm building the the data integration models and the neural networks and semantic networks
I see.
that then use those sensors, and whether the sensors are detecting chemical levels,
I see.
or and of course we're training with human sensory panels, so they rate
Yeah, so that's the
something,
question there,
and then
yeah.
because of that, we can discover the correlations of the chemical composition with how humans perceive it.
Because the question I was going to ask is, a dog probably doesn't have the same vision as I have,
Correct.
but it will use its sense of vision to make the right decisions about, say, obstacles, the same I would, right? So it's easier to build a Tesla because that sort of visual censoring, the purpose of it with the movement is usually the same, right?
But each animal has limitations, right? A bird smashes into your window, I bet, right? So
Yeah,
they
true.
don't have sense
Yeah,
of
true. Oh,
insights.
yeah, I see,
So
I see.
we all have our limits.
I see.
mean,
So my question though, that's a good point. My question though was, when it comes to taste, right? Taste is, even among humans, it's very, very subjective, right?
and it's cultural.
What's that?
It's local and cultural.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's very subjective. It's very localized. It's a culture thing as well.
That's part of what we're building into our system. So we want to be able to profile a local taste palette, so that companies that have a product that may have succeeded in their home country, how do they modify
Capitalism
it?
is back.
How do they morph it into
okay.
something that local market will like?
see.
And so that's one of the many applications that we're doing. Another one will be ingredient substitution. Many people have things that they don't want to eat. For whatever reason. I'm not going to judge.
I
whatever.
see,
Or some people are trying to save the world by not eating palm
Yeah.
oil. So these big companies are feeling the pressure to change their recipes to be able to accommodate all these different dietary preferences and restrictions.
Warned us that we were going to need $100 million to really get a new category of consumer electronic chemical peripheral, because it's like an inkjet printer, right? There's chemicals in it. And they said every new one that they had ever done cost them $100 million. We've only raised $25 million to date, so we tried to raise a huge amount. We had one of our previous investors, a fragrance and flavor chemical company, is Givaudan, which had spun out of Hoffman Lurch. They had invested in us, as had Quest. Both of them were, one was out of Switzerland, one out of Holland. And each had invested several million. And now we said, all right, let's do the big raise. Let's raise giant amount. So Goldman Sachs was up for it. The prior fragrance and flavor chemical company, Givaudan, they were prepared to up to 50 million. And Goldman Sachs would put in 50, and Unilever would put in 50. And so it was going to be 150 million valuation. Sony was now really psyched. So was Procter & Gamble, our partner for scale-up manufacturing and distribution. And unfortunately, they had their own battles. Our fragrance and flavor chemical company had a personal battle between the CEO and the CFO. And at the board level. So right after we had completed all the due diligence hurdles, everybody had said, yeah, these guys are real. This technology works. Amazing. Yes. And it was like worldwide, every division of all these entities had to give their thumbs up. And then just personal battles within the board of one of your key investors. So that was a fateful day. That was April 11th, 2001. And we spent the rest of that year trying to license out our gene patents, because we had found that genes for the sense of smell in humans and monkeys I had. Leveraging off of the woman who won the Nobel Prize for finding those genes in mice and rats, Linda Bach. So I used her data and I found human and monkey homologs. And anyway, we were trying to license it. We were trying everything we could. And the investors in New York wanted to restart us, recapitalize. Obviously, it crushed us down, but at least we'd survive. And so that was coming out of Morgan Stanley at the World Trade Center. And so we kept on flying out there. They never quite had all the right people in the room to make a final decision. So in between all that, we had an emergency that required us to go help out family and deal with a really difficult, dangerous situation for my partner's family. And that became our focus. I canceled everything. Only after 9/11, when that was the day we resolved the crisis that his family was in. We entered into a hotel and we saw on every screen the towers falling. It still didn't hit us till like 2 months later. I was going through our calendar and I said, you know what? We were supposed to meet with Jose and his gang at the 50th floor of the World Trade Center, 9 a.m. We had 2 dates, September 10th and September 11th. So we'd done the 10th. We would have been on the flight coming back from San Francisco that the passengers helped crash land in Pennsylvania. Remember those guys? Let's roll. Or we would have the next day been actually at the floor where the plane hit. So
That's
anyways,
that's
one
crazy.
crisis saved it from another.
That's crazy luck.
So that was humbling. It was like, all right, there's a message from God or somebody saying that maybe we just need to focus on real shit for a while and quit trying to be the whiz kids. And so we chilled. And eventually it was a depressing feeling. A company like that, which had done groundbreaking, amazing technology, and we had to walk away from it. And it's like, we had huge amounts of partnerships. We didn't realize how popular the company was. We had like 5,000 people download our software developers kit. We had partnerships with Sony and Microsoft for the PlayStation and the Xbox. We had deals with Columbia TriStar and DreamWorks for doing product placements in movies. And we deals with Procter & Gamble and Kraft. We're putting proprietary scents in their movies. And, it was just incredible, the amount of partnerships we had, a lot of buy-in. Everybody wanted to see it happen. And, the press mocked us. They mocked us the whole time. That's why we named the company and everything we did with sarcastic, self-deprecating humor. So our website was called the Snortle. The product was called the I Smell. Our software team was the Skunkworks. So everything we did was, I'm glad to always help with everyone. I help Ugandans all the time with trying to raise capital. It's not always easy at all. And sometimes it's borderline impossible. It just requires a lot of patience too, which comes down to some of the founding principles that I have with company. It's like when I talk to founders, are you guys ready to be effectively married for the next several years? Because that's what you are.
What reasons did they give you? Why were they convincing you to move to Uganda?
They said, look, you're single, you don't have children, you're married, come here. You like to be on the cutting edge of everything. Uganda's now the new frontier. It's not high tech, but it's a different type of frontier. And,
so how long did it take you for you to make up the decision to finally move back here?
Years.
After visiting.
Well, I just saw the place is changing and growing so rapidly, and it was so interesting. And Uganda was always the place that felt most like home.
Really?
Yeah, I call it tropical peasant time.
Okay.
Yeah, tropical peasants are in their own little personal world. They keep track of time, right? They keep track of, but it's more like hours.
Okay.
Whereas I'm kind of in a world of
little bit.
microseconds. I'm a scientist and engineer.
I get that difference. How do you find the food?
It's fine. I love it.
Really?
I have my toke and binyebwa. That's a peanut sauce, and I eat all the local food.
Did it take a while for you to get used to the food and like it?
No, immediately.
Wow.
To do the things I do, because I start up companies, I raise investment capital, I do feasibility studies for businesses, and I cross the sectors, biotechnology, hospitals, factories. I had a biomass company in Jinja, Bulungi Wansi Energy.
So the major reason you moved to Uganda was because they pitched you into moving to Uganda, but then still you're doing some work for the country.
Well, I just saw the place is changing and growing so rapidly, and it was so interesting because when I had come in 07, I eventually traveled to several African countries in 07 and 08. I went to Zimbabwe, Zambia, Angola, Nigeria, Ethiopia. So I got to see a lot of Africa, and Uganda was always the place that felt most like home.
Really?
Yeah, it's like I really think despite everybody's complaints and frustrations,
It felt more
I think
like
it's
home
the
to
best
you.
country in Africa. And so,
Oh, that's also, there's a Luganda saying about, 2 years and
so and this is it's an interesting place, and it's youthful. It's the youngest country on earth, and Africans are going to be half of humanity by the end of the century, right? At the rate of growth we have now.
yeah, true.
So half of all human beings on earth will be African. So I think that's important. I don't know what it means, but it still seems important. And so why do I, and I see a lot of opportunities to improve things. There's lots of room for improvement. A country like Canada, it's so hard to see how you can make it better. Versus here, there's so many ways it can be made better. And some of it's just drawing from lessons that we already learned in the US or Canada or anywhere else. And like I was able to fix some problems for hospitals by applying a labeling technology that I used in the 1990s at Stanford Hospital to solve some of our problems of samples getting mislabeled or lost and not being able to redo an experiment. So it turned out we had a lot of problems at the hospitals here in Uganda of getting results for HIV or TB or whatever, where false positives, false negatives, and then you go back to retest the same sample and you can't find it because the label fell off or the writing gone.
Careful with stars, not every light is gonna guide you.